This is massive for Ohio State. Massive. Because he was the foundational piece of the offensive line. College football has never been better. Interest has never been higher. Believe that we are at the dawn of the golden age of college football. It was an epic day of college football. It was one of those days where you fall in love with the sport all over again. Hey, welcome into the program. This is the Joel Klatt Show. I am Joel Klatt, and we are ready to go with Week 13 picks and previews. This show, as always, is brought to you by Hampton, by Hilton, and we thank them for all of their support here at the Joel Klatt Show. Hey, remember, if you're watching on YouTube, congratulations. That's awesome. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You're going to figure out that we've got all sorts of content, and we've got more coming as the season winds down and we start heading into the college football playoff. Make sure to hit that notification button, and then you'll see when all of our content ends up dropping. Leave a comment below. Rate and review us wherever you're listening to this, wherever you get your podcasts, and then you can follow us on social media, wherever you like to social media. You could be on X. We're there. Let's see, we're on Instagram, TikTok. We're on all of them. At Joel Klatt Show. That's where you find us, and you've got all of our content out there. I am excited, and here's the thing, is that these picks and previews, normally this time of year, there's just a handful of games that could actually be labeled as important for the college football playoff or for conference races, and now there's so many, we actually had to pare it down. This is going to be the most games that we run previews on and picks on this late in the season ever at the Joel Klatt Show. So I've got 8 games that we're going to talk about. Of course, we're going to start with the one that I'll be at. Not going to make a pick in this one, but let me run down this matchup. Top 5 matchup. Indiana heading to Ohio State. So the Buckeyes take on the Hoosiers, and everybody is wondering about Indiana and how they're going to fare in this game, as what I think a lot of people are thinking is their most difficult test, going to face Ryan Day and the Ohio State Buckeyes, and they are correct. All of those that believe that. This is the stiffest test for Indiana, and more so because they just don't do this all that often. Now, it is fascinating because in years past, they were in the Big Ten East, so they had to play Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State every single year. So they are not foreign to playing these teams. What they are foreign to is playing in a matchup in which they are also expected to play well, a top 5 matchup. In fact, the last time they were in a top 5 matchup, it was 1968. The Rose Bowl in 1968 against USC. Meanwhile, Ohio State is playing their 3rd top 5 matchup of the season. You know, they kind of live in these atmospheres. And to be candid, like, this is all Ohio State thinks about, is these type of games. They think about Michigan. They think about these types of games, and they refer to them as matchup games. When talent is equated, how do we play? So Ohio State's entire program is built for matchup games. Meanwhile, Indiana is this upstart with all these JMU transfers that came with Curt Cignetti, and now we're going to figure out what they do in a matchup game for the first time. From that standpoint, this is incredibly fascinating in terms of the narrative surrounding these 2 programs, where they've been in college football, and then what we get on Saturday in the shoe. The news, though, that is going to dominate over the next couple of days, and you heard it yesterday, and when we were recording yesterday's episode, we started getting rumblings of this, and I didn't want to address it then until we knew for sure. And news this week is that center Seth McLaughlin, who is playing at an All-American level, he transferred in from Alabama, and he's really been a mainstay for them. And if you talk with the coaches, they talk about him as being not just he's playing well, but like vital to their success. Seth McLaughlin tore his Achilles reportedly in practice, which is just an absolute gut punch for Ohio State because of what he's meant to their offensive line and then their offense as a whole. They've talked about his professionalism, his play on the field, him and what he means to Carson Hinsman, who went in at left guard in their previous reshuffle of the offensive line after they lost Simmons, their starting left tackle. So now they're going to be down Simmons. They're going to be down McLaughlin. And there's going to be questions surrounding how exactly they're going to roll out this lineup. They had found a really good system with Carson Hinsman, last year's center, at left guard, while Donovan Jackson moved out from left guard to left tackle. Hinsman has a whole season of center experience under his belt. Now, it didn't go all that great late last year, and it's one of the reasons why they brought in McLaughlin and he won that job. Do they go back to Hinsman at center and then say, like, Austin Severan comes in and plays guard, which he has rotated in for the majority of the year? Or do they go with a guy like Josh Padilla, who's been taking the backup center reps for the bulk of the season? I think that this is not going to get the amount of coverage that it probably should. I'm here to tell you, this is massive for Ohio State. Massive. Because he was the foundational piece of the offensive line, right in the middle. And they had been struggling at each guard spot, but he was the foundation. So they felt like they could get away with some of that guard play. And then they started to solidify some of that guard play with Hinsman coming in there at left guard. And now the middle of that offensive line is a major question mark for Ohio State. Major question mark. And that is not where you want to be when you're going into a matchup game against Indiana. When you're going into a matchup game, even though not record-wise, but certainly talent-wise in the interior against Michigan next week. So this is a precarious spot to be in if you're Ohio State. That's why I wanted to lead with that news, because I think it's the biggest part of the game. That's where my eyes early in the game are going to be fixated on, is how the Ohio State offensive line is playing early in the game. How are they protecting them? How are they running the football? All of those things are vital. Now we go to some of the other parts of the game which have drawn the interest of everybody throughout the year. But Curtis Rourke, the signal caller, the quarterback for Indiana, he's played exceptional. I've been highly impressed with Curtis Rourke. He plays on time. He plays in rhythm. This is an offense that is a post-snap read offense. And because of that, he's got a lot of the RPOs. He makes a lot of the decisions post-snap. And he's done a remarkable job. And his timing is as good as anybody. When I watch Curtis Rourke on film, the ball is out on time all the time. You know, he very rarely is going to pat the ball and wait or hold it and then have to scramble. He gets to that last step in his drop, and whether it's a hitch step or whether it's a firm drop, meaning like 1, 2, 3, no hitch step, throw it. Or a hitch step, 1, 2, 3, hitch up, throw the football. He makes the decisions very quickly, which allows him to play in rhythm, which allows him to play with great accuracy. One of his strengths is his ability to throw the back shoulder fade. This is going to be a major component of this game. In fact, it is the one area where I actually would think to myself, I think Indiana has a bit of an advantage, and that's throwing the back shoulder fade. They're highly experienced on the outside with some of these transfer wide receivers. Rourke is as good as anybody in college football at the timing and accuracy of that back shoulder fade. The back shoulder fade, if those of you that don't know, that's when your wide receiver runs a fade route, and rather than trying to throw it over the top with touch, you basically drive it at his back shoulder, and then he just drops out of it and comes away with the football. They do it exceptionally well. And I think that they're going to try that. Man, if I said 8 times, I think that would be low. They're going to throw 8 to 15 back shoulder fades. I'm convinced of it because that's where Oregon attacked Ohio State, not specifically with the back shoulder, but with the one-on-one on the outside. Ohio State's defense is number 1 in the country right now. They're one of the great defenses in college football. But where they have shown that they are susceptible is the outside, the 2 corners. You know, Denzel Burke got beat against Oregon, granted against elite speed. Igbinosun on the other side struggles with penalties. I don't think that there's any way to put it. He gets handsy. We've seen the defensive pass interference there. So that's where Indiana's going to attack. Now we go to the offensive side for Ohio State. And aside from the offensive line, maybe they neutralize the effect of losing their center by just making it a game that's played on the perimeter. If they do that, they have a huge advantage. That's obvious. Emeka Ibuka on the outside, Carnell Tate on the outside, and then the guy that I love, Jeremiah Smith. Is this the game that we see them just target Jeremiah Smith like they used to do with the Marvin Harrison? It could be. I don't think that you can defend him. I think that I've been waiting for Ohio State to just, whether it's a series or a quarter or a half or a game, just say, you know what? He's the best, most dominant athlete on the field. We're just going to target him 12, 13, 14, 15 times and live with the results. I do not believe that Indiana can cover Jeremiah Smith. In particular, maybe even down the field. There are times Smith is so good and so fast. And there are rarely players that I say this about, but he is a regardless wide receiver. That means that regardless of the coverage, you throw it to him. Regardless of the matchup, you throw it to him. Regardless of safety play, you throw it to him. Let me give you an example. You could have a single high safety, which you would normally never throw a seam fade against unless you're holding him with the backside seam. If you've only got one side and you're trying to run an inside release go route, essentially right down the hash mark, you would never throw that against a single safety because you would think that the single safety is over the top of that go route. There's nothing to hold him on the backside. Maybe it's play action, you're trying to get there, and then what generally you're doing is clearing out with that go route and throwing a big over underneath that safety. So these are the schematics that take place in the passing game. Well, with Smith, I think there are times that if he's running a seam go, you throw it to him regardless of coverage. Even if it's a single safety, throw it to him. That's how good he is. You know, there's a bit of like a Randy Moss effect with Jeremiah Smith, and I'm just wondering if they potentially go that direction. Great offense for Indiana against great defense for Ohio State. That's going to be a terrific matchup. And then it generally comes down to quarterback play, and it's going to come down to red zone efficiency. Ohio State's defense has been one of the great red zone defenses in college football. Meanwhile, Indiana's offense has been one of the more efficient red zone offenses in college football. Which team can hold the opposition to field goals rather than allowing them touchdowns? All the old adages apply, and I can't wait for the game. We will be there. Big Noon Kickoff is live in Columbus. Gus, Ginny, and I have the call noon Eastern as Big Noon Saturday rolls into Columbus. All right, let's get through some of the other games because all of these games have playoff implications, folks. Okay, obviously there is for that Ohio State-Indiana game, excuse me, I just hit the microphone. But then there are more games like that, and let's go to Arrowhead where Colorado's going to head on the road to face a resurgent Kansas team, and this game is going to take place at Arrowhead in Kansas City. Colorado is a 2.5-point favorite. Now, the way that they've been playing, maybe you think that that's low, but I think it's pretty accurate. And the reason is because Kansas has found their form in the last couple of weeks. They've beaten now Iowa State and BYU in the last 2 weeks. They've stopped turning the ball over. Jalen Daniels is a veteran. They've got a veteran defense. This was a team that I believed in the preseason was going to compete for the Big 12 championship. It didn't go that way because they turned the ball over too much, and in one-score games, they were not efficient enough to win those games. So going into last week, they were 0-5 in one-score games. Then they finally beat BYU in a one-score game on the road at night. Now they've got to face Colorado, and this Lance Leipold team, I'm just telling you, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. Jalen Daniels, their quarterback. He's a threat with his legs. He's a threat with his arm. I look at this team and I think to myself, if you don't turn them over, if you don't take the ball away, there's a good chance that they score a bunch of points. Now, the same can be said about Colorado. Colorado's got the best offense in the Big 12. They played just okay last week against against Utah and scored 49. Now, one of those touchdowns was scored on a punt return. So let's say 42 offensive points. But let's face it, that's the best defense you're going to play in the Big 12. Utah's injuries were not on the defensive side. They played pretty well defensively against Colorado in the first quarter and a half, and then Colorado got itself some rhythm. They found the adjustments in order to move the football, and then they put up 42 offensively. That's pretty good, folks. This was the number one defense in the Big 12, Utah was last week. And Colorado just kind of ran roughshod over them and didn't even play great and didn't even have Jimmy Horn out there. Now, we'll see if Jimmy Horn is able to go in this game. He is suffering from a high ankle sprain, and so I have my doubts that he would be ready and effective for this game. But this offense is averaging 37 points in Big 12 play. They've scored at least 28 in every single Big 12 game, and they haven't even played their best game offensively. Not for an entire game. We've seen stretches where they've been great, but even against Utah, again, like I said, they were just so-so at moments. Shedeur has been fantastic. Maybe not great early in the game last week against Utah, but overall he's been fantastic. He's tied for second in college football with passing touchdowns with 27. He's sixth in passing yards. This is a guy that should get mentioned for the Heisman Trophy. Everyone's going to focus on his teammate, Travis Hunter, and rightly so. Travis is probably going to win that award, but Shedeur should be in New York. He should be a Heisman finalist. He's the best quarterback in the country. He is more important to Colorado than even Travis is. You know, if you take away Shedeur, Colorado's not in this position at all. If you take away Travis, which they've had to at times when he didn't really play against Arizona, he didn't play in the second half against Kansas State. And they can manage. Now, that's not to take anything away from Travis, who I think is the best player in college football, but the quarterback is just so vital, and we all understand that. So Shedeur and his importance are vital. And then his ability to be protected. If they protect Shedeur, they win going away. When this guy is protected, he is surgical. Best in the country, without a doubt. And Kansas isn't particularly potent rushing the passer. So I have my doubts that Kansas is all of a sudden going to present a pass rush that Colorado's going to be all that scared of. Like they've seen some teams that can get after it. Utah can get after it with their front. Nebraska could get after it. Kansas State could get after it. Baylor got after him. Kansas will do nothing that Colorado is like, man, we've never seen anything like this before. So because of that, my assumption is that Colorado will be able to move the football. Even if they don't play well for the entire fourth quarter or 4 quarters, they will at some point be able to move the ball and score. Travis is the Heisman frontrunner, coming off a game with an INT, that spectacular 4th down catch. He had a rushing touchdown. The guy does everything well. And to me, it comes down to this. Like, is Colorado's defensive front going to continue to play as dominantly as they've been playing over the last couple of weeks? They are the best pass rush in the conference, and last week they stopped the run as well as anybody. And in fact, Kyle Whittingham was somewhat shocked about it, how well they played against the run. If they force Kansas to be one-dimensional and Kansas cannot get out and run the football, then watch out. Colorado's going to win going away. I think that this team is narrowly focused on this goal. They understand that they control their own destiny. They can clinch this week, by the way. If they beat Kansas and then BYU and Utah both win their games, Colorado clinches a berth in the Big 12 championship game. I like Colorado in this game. It might be close, but I don't think 2.5 is enough. Even on the road, the way that they're playing, the way that they've played on the road for the majority of the season, whether it's UCF or Texas Tech or all these different places, they've played well on the road. I think Colorado wins this one, 34-28. So I'm giving the 2.5 here, and I think Colorado goes out there and wins another game on the road in November, and they're one step closer to going to the Big 12 championship game in the college football playoff. Let's go to BYU, Arizona State. Arizona State is favored by 3.5. Now, after last week, BYU lost to Kansas. Now, Kenny Dillingham has this team at Arizona State. They've snuck up on everybody. All of a sudden, it's like, wait, hold on. Arizona State is damn good. And they've got a transfer quarterback. They've got Scadaboo, and they're going to be tough to beat. If you look at this team, they've got a redshirt freshman quarterback. His name is Sam Leavitt. Leavitt is 8-1 as a starter. So one of their 2 losses is when he didn't even play. So he's 8-1 as a starter. Their offense runs through Cam Scadaboo. Scadaboo is a hell of a player. A hell of a player. He is one of the best all-around backs in the country. He's averaging 169 scrimmage yards this season. That's 3rd best in college football. And I just don't think that BYU is playing well enough to go on the road and beat a team that's trajectory is clearly pointed up. Again, with Leavitt healthy and in the lineup, they're 8-1. Kenny Dillingham has done a marvelous job, and Arizona State actually controls their own destiny to get to the Big 12 championship game, which means they're in the same boat as Colorado. They control their own destiny to get to the college football playoff. Wow. Like, this season could not be playing out any better if you're just a fan of the sport. It really couldn't, because you've got teams, I think they were picked to finish like dead last in the Big 12, and here they are, 8-2, a quarterback that's playing well, a really good running back, and BYU has struggled offensively in the last few weeks. They did not score a touchdown in 4 red zone trips last week, and they've been bad on 3rd down. They can't stay on the field. So all the magic that was happening for BYU has kind of like left them. They're not the TCU team from a few years ago because that magic stayed with TCU throughout those close games. And now all of a sudden, BYU with a loss, they've thrived off takeaways defensively, and Levitt just doesn't throw picks. He hasn't thrown a pick in his last 3 games. I like Arizona State in this one. I'm giving the 3.5. Sun Devils favored by 3.5. I'm giving the 3.5, and I think Arizona State wins this one, 24-17, something along those lines. I think that the Sun Devils win and they keep their hopes alive for a Big 12 championship game berth. All right, the game that every SEC fan is going to be paying attention to and rooting for Army. That's right. We're all Americans, right? But the SEC is just like maybe a little bit more on this Army side because Army takes on Notre Dame. This game is going to be at Yankee Stadium. Notre Dame is a 14.5-point favorite in this one. Army, of course, is unbeaten. Tennessee fans, y'all rooting for Army, aren't you? Yes, you are. Because I think Tennessee might need a little bit of chaos. You don't want to be sitting there as the odd team out in that 10-2 jumble in the SEC. So getting Notre Dame to 10-2 would certainly, with the way that their schedule is played out with their loss to Northern Illinois, that would bump them behind those 10-2 SEC teams, which would be good for a team like Tennessee. So a lot of interested parties in here rooting for Army and Bryson Daly. Bryson Daly, the quarterback for Army, averages 133 rush yards per game this year. That's about 5th among all players in college football. Army's defense is very good, folks. Very good. Number 2 scoring defense in the country this year, giving up 10 points per game. Now, having said that, Notre Dame has won 8 straight, and we haven't paid too much attention to them, but what was a sluggish offense early in the year has certainly turned the corner. This is an offense now, when you look up, during their 8-game win streak, they're putting up nearly 43 points per game. So no one's saying hey, Notre Dame their offense is getting it done. They threw it well against Navy. So even if you don't think that their passing game is great, when they have the matchups, which they will against Army, they could probably throw the ball well against Army. As much as I love Army, Notre Dame has quietly improved themselves dramatically since the beginning of the year. They still have that win over Texas A&M on the road to open the season. And yeah, we've seen some clunkers from them and their offense not look great, but generally speaking, that was way early in the season. So since the Northern Illinois game, they've gotten better and better and better on the offensive side. I think that they're comfortable playing against an academy because they do it twice a year. So normally when a team plays like Army or Navy or Air Force, one of these academies, it's man, this is so difficult to prepare for. That's one of the talking points going into those games. But Notre Dame does it so often that I don't think it's as big of a factor in this matchup as I would in other matchups. So the advantage that inherently an academy can have against another team, and this one is minimized because of the amount of times that Notre Dame plays them. And by the way, they're comfortable playing this style of game. They can get into a run slugfest if they want. Jeremiah Love is a really good back for Notre Dame. He ran for 137 last week against Virginia. He's got 12 touchdowns on the year. They're just not going to be flinched or phased. They won't flinch and they won't be phased in this game, in this environment. I like Notre Dame in this one. They're favored by 14.5, and I actually like them to cover. As much as I think Army is an incredible story and they can take the air out of the ball and their defense is very good, their defense gets protected, which is a big reason why they're the number 2 scoring defense in the country. So when their defense gets protected, do we really know what they're going to be as far as a matchup? I don't think that their rank as a scoring defense lines up with the matchup disparity that they're going to have against the Irish. So I think Notre Dame scores 34 points in this one, 34-17, something along those lines. I like Notre Dame to cover. So I'm going to give the 14.5, and I think the Irish has a big win, 34-17 in Yankee Stadium. Let's get to some of these SEC games. Bama at Oklahoma. This is a fascinating one. Kalen DeBoer and Bama control their own destiny. They're favored by 13.5. And they've largely figured things out, in particular on the defensive side. Do you remember earlier in the year, and I gave this take as hey, they reminded me a little bit of these Oklahoma teams that the defense was not great and they were going to have to win shootouts. And while that was true when I said it, it has changed and they have developed, and the defense is actually playing a lot better. A lot better. We know what Jalen Milroe can do. I think Jalen Milroe at his best is probably the most dynamic quarterback in the country because of the way that he can just hurt you. And I mean, like, hurt you deeply with his legs or with his arm. And they've obviously got the wide receiver core to do that. They control their own destiny, as I mentioned, and their defense has been taking the ball away. They've got 16 takeaways over the last 5 games. That's the most in the country. So Bama is quietly playing a lot better on the defensive side, which makes them a much larger threat in the grand scheme of college football and for the playoff and for the SEC championship and for a national championship. This team absolutely could still go win a national championship. Meanwhile, Oklahoma is like, they're not great, guys. Like, I know that we want to say like it's Oklahoma, and I get it, and I've been a huge fan of Oklahoma my entire career. This team is not good. They lost that crazy game to Missouri last week. There were 4 touchdowns in the last 5 minutes of that game, 4 minutes of that game. And remember, Arnold gets strip sacked and Missouri scores. OU is now 1-5 in the SEC. They're averaging only 15 points per game in SEC play. They've given up the second most sacks in the entire country with 41. That's more than Colorado. We always bang on Colorado with the amount that they throw it and their offensive line play. And here's Oklahoma. They've given up 41 sacks. That's a staggering amount. Staggering amount. Jackson Arnold is back at quarterback. He couldn't even get to 100 yards passing against Missouri. I do like their defense. Danny Stutzman deserves a lot of credit because he's still out there playing his absolute butt off. Danny Stutzman is a stud, folks. Like, he's one of the best defensive players in the country. He's out there last week against Missouri making 19 tackles. This is not a defensive issue for Oklahoma. They can play some defense. Their offense is terrible. Terrible. And I just don't think it's all of a sudden going to correct itself against a Bama team that controls their own destiny. That just doesn't make any sense to me. 13.5 is not enough because of the explosiveness of Jalen Milroe and that offense and the lack of offense that you get from the Sooners. So to me, like, even if Oklahoma plays really well, they're going to hold Bama to what, 28? So you mean to tell me that Oklahoma's going to score 17? No, they're not. Not with the way that Bama is creating turnovers and not with the way that they're rushing the quarterback and playing just overall on the defensive side. Look at what they did in Missouri. Now, it was a banged-up Missouri team, but, like, this is not a good offense for Oklahoma. So at best, I can see Oklahoma scoring like 10 points. And at worst, I see Oklahoma holding Bama to like 28. I got 28-10. Bama covers on the road. I get it. Like, you can't tell me that the environment is going to be so. Bama wins this one. I like them. I like the way that they're trending. They're starting to play their best football at the right time. That's exactly what Kalen DeBoer would want. All right, Ole Miss and Florida. Hey, Tennessee fans, how do you feel about rooting for the Gators? Ole Miss is 10.5-point favorites in the Swamp. So Ole Miss is coming off that bye week following the huge win, and I think Lane Kiffin's biggest win by a wide margin at Ole Miss. They beat that Georgia team, and now they just have to take care of business, and they're going to go to the college football playoff unless they don't. And this is where Tennessee needs Ole Miss to lose. They need Florida to win this game. Tennessee's rooting for Army. They're rooting for Florida in this game. They'll be rooting for Texas next week against Texas A&M. They're going to be rooting for Minnesota in the game against Penn State. Like, that, Tennessee fans are all of a sudden now just like jumping on bandwagons around the country, and I'm here for it. I'm not telling you that you're wrong. Tennessee fans, like, let's go. But doesn't it feel a little dirty to be rooting for Florida? Like, can you do it? Vol fans, if you're still there, leave a comment below. Like, how do you feel about rooting for Florida? Probably not great, but you're still going to do it, right? It's like eating your mom's worst dish. Like, she cooks it and you're like, I don't feel great about this, but I'm going to do it because I love you, right? Like, that's kind of what we're doing at this point. Okay, so Florida, they've been playing better. We know this. I think that, guys, I think this is too big of a line. I'm just toying with Tennessee fans right now, aren't I? I can't pick Florida. All right. Napier has done a nice job. You're going to get Lagway back. He's recovered from that hamstring injury. They're explosive. They don't need a lot of snaps. Look at last week, by the way, against LSU. I looked at this and I was like, wait, is this right? LSU ran 92 plays and Florida ran 43. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter. The Gators create huge explosive plays because of Lagway. Can they do that against Ole Miss? We'll see, because Ole Miss's defensive line is tremendous. This defense is tremendous. They can rush to the quarterback. Kirby told us all about that in that post-game press conference. There's something about the way that this Florida team has gotten better, the way that they're playing. They get their coach. They've got the vote of confidence. He's coming back. You get Lagway. You're building towards the future, and you get a little bit of pressure on Ole Miss because it's like, hey, all we got to do is not lose. Well, when you're playing to not lose, you generally don't play your best. You want to be chasing something, not protecting something. That's why it's so difficult to do what Alabama and Georgia have done over the last few years, and even Ohio State or Michigan. Ole Miss is one of the best offenses in the country. They're going against a Florida defense that has been up and down. Let's face it. The Gators did hold LSU to 16, though, last week on those 92 plays, which I think is trending upwards. Ole Miss might get wide receiver Trey Harris back. He's missed the last 3 games. Harris leads the country with 141 yards receiving per game. That Ole Miss defensive line, though, they're dominant. That's why they're going to win. So sorry, Vol fans. I do think Ole Miss is going to win. I just think Florida covers the 10.5. So I can see a game like Ole Miss 35-28. That makes sense to me. So I've got Florida. I'm going to take the 10.5, but I've got Ole Miss winning the game. All right, A&M and Auburn. This one's fascinating because this is a clear look-ahead game for Texas A&M and Mike Elko. And in fact, as much as Mike Elko wants to tell us it's not a look-ahead game, he's doing it himself. Listen to this.
There's already so much talk about November 30th, it was announced as a night game today. How do you deal with that with your guys and saying, hey, we still have something ahead of us at Auburn, or is that even a big issue with your team?
I don't think it's an issue. I think when you're in the situation we're in, it's easy to focus on the task at hand. I think, those big games earlier in the year, maybe you look ahead. If we didn't have at stake what's at stake, maybe you would worry about it. I think our focus is single-handedly on on Auburn right now and locked in on what we got to get done.
Huh. Where's your focus? I get it. And you guys know, you listen to this program. I do this all the time. I've got 4 teams in my head and I say the wrong team. But when you're answering the question specifically about looking ahead, and then you look ahead, we're going to believe you. I think Texas A&M looks ahead in this game. I think this game is going to be gross. I don't know why. I just have this sense it's like, one, I don't trust Auburn offensively. You've got Le'Veon Moss is now out for the season, running back for A&M with that knee injury he suffered against South Carolina. They're going to have to lean on Marcel Reed, and Reed has been up and down. Moments of great play, moments of really poor play. I mean, Reed against South Carolina was not very good. They've tried to go to him, then they went back. Like, he's had opportunities in this game. This is not all of a sudden like this team is playing great. Their great win against LSU doesn't look all that quality now after Florida handled LSU much more handily than Texas A&M did. So, I know that we're sitting here and it's like, this has been a great story for Texas A&M. But when you really look at it under the microscope, it starts to chip away. So it could be very easy for me to sit here and say, hey, Vegas has got it right, man. 2.5 is the absolute right line. Maybe Auburn's going to win. And then you start looking at Auburn and you're like, ugh. Nope. Auburn is 1-6 against the Power 4 this season. They're only averaging 16 points per game in SEC play. And Cal won there. So as much as I could say, like, Mike Elko is looking ahead, A&M is looking ahead, they don't have Le'Veon Moss, Marcel Reed has been up and down, it's a look ahead. I don't know, it's difficult and War Eagle and all. No. This is very similar to how I feel about Alabama going to Oklahoma. Auburn is not a good football team. I do not care what conference they play in. That doesn't make them a good football team. Cal beat them in Auburn. Period. So Texas A&M has to win this game, and they should, and I do believe they will. I think they win a gross game, lots of turnovers, sloppy game. 19-13, they cover the 2.5. Give the 2.5, take the Aggies. Penn State, Minnesota. How do we feel, Vol fans? Are you rowing the boat? Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. Look at this. I love how it's become just all about Tennessee here. So Tennessee fans are rowing the boat with PJ. Penn State is an 11.5-point favorite. That's actually gone down. It was 12.5 at one point. Now it's 11.5 Penn State. So people starting to feel Minnesota a little bit. Penn State cannot afford to slip up. We obviously know that. They could find themselves in that 10-2 conversation, and then it gets a little bit gritty in terms of where you land as it relates to the SEC and some of those strengths of schedules and their marquee win and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, Minnesota has been sneaky. They've got one blip on the radar. I'm going to give you that, but they have been sneaky. They really should have beat Michigan. They played a great second half after a really poor first half. Then they beat USC. They beat UCLA. They beat Illinois. And then the anomaly and the slip up was this loss to Rutgers. So now they're 6-4. But as the season has gone on, like, this is a team that is very much in their coach's image. PJ coaches hard nose. He's a guy that I think does things the right way. They're fundamentally sound, and they're difficult. They're just difficult to beat because they do everything right. They generally do. Now, Penn State, they are riding high right now. Ever since that loss to Ohio State, man, they have fixed the things that have ailed them. Namely, they're getting the ball to Tyler Warren. The offense has been tremendous. They've scored touchdowns on 12 of their 19 possessions over the last 2 weeks. That was the whiteout against Washington and then on the road against Purdue. Should we give them flowers for the win against Purdue? Probably not. Probably not. But they have fixed the things that they didn't do against Ohio State. So they're learning from their lesson. Tyler Warren continues to play like the best tight end in America. He had 190 yards from scrimmage last week, including 2 rushing touchdowns. Coy Parrish is a young secondary player for Minnesota. I touched on him a little bit. He's a freshman that came in, and when he was playing against Michigan, I mentioned that he was in the game. He's been a real bright spot for them, and I do think that his matchup against Warren is interesting. So we're going to see one of the young quality players in the Big Ten on the secondary defensive side against Tyler Warren in this game. Aller's been really good, 90% last week against Purdue. To me, it comes down to the pass rush for Penn State. If it's dominant, if they can stop the run and force the game onto Brosmer's arm, then they're going to have a great chance in this game. They're going to probably win this game. Minnesota's only hope is you've got to run the football. You got to stop the run. You have to. Like, if you can't do that, then it's going to be a struggle. And the evidence is there. The data suggests that if you're able to stop the run or at least contain the run against Penn State, then they're going to struggle. So think of it this way. Penn State is 7-0 right now when they run the ball for 150 yards. The 3 times that they haven't, they've lost to Ohio State. They had the overtime win against USC and the sluggish win against UCLA. So that's what you got to do. That's what you got to do. I think Penn State is going to win this game, but I sense some sort of hard-nosed late cover from Minnesota. So I'm going to take the 11.5, and I'm going to say Penn State wins by 10. To me, this is like a 31-14 game with 5 minutes to go, and all of a sudden Minnesota gets a late touchdown, and it's 31-21. Minnesota covers the 11.5. But Penn State wins this one 31-21. So there are 7 picks there for you. Let's review them. And by the way, folks, we are 38-24 on the season. We were 2-2 last week. We're still 61% on the year against the spread. So here's the recap. I've got Colorado covering on the road. They're going to win. I've got Arizona State covering at home. I'm going to give the 3.5. I've got Notre Dame beating Army I'm going to say they cover the 14.5. Alabama on the road, they cover the 13.5. I'm going with a lot of favorites here. And then we've got the Florida pick. And that Florida one, I just think they're going to play well. That's a tough place to play. Ole Miss is protecting. Florida, take the 10.5. A&M, I'm going to give the 2.5 because Auburn is terrible, folks. They just are. And Minnesota, a late touchdown. They cover the 11.5. Penn State gets the win. There are the picks. We're 38-24 in the year. So congratulations to you if you've been following along. Hey, listen, remember to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at Joel Klatt Show. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit that notification button below and leave a comment. And enjoy the week of college football, everybody. It's going to be epic.